Just before Sandhya start talking, I just want to do a quick intro just for the podcast, intro, I guess, so that it becomes more cleaner. Go ahead.
Okay. You want to do that after I?
Yeah, that's just before the presentation side, because that's where we start the podcast session.
Okay, so let me see if I can share here. Can you see my screen with the?
Yes, sir.
Yep. So this is our education and networking series. Really originated from James's multifamily investors group on Facebook with James, myself, and Trevor. So we have this. I have more details in here. This is really essentially the same information. We're the host. It's about education and networking, because we'll have some breakout rooms in the end where we can get in smaller groups and talk to each other. It's on every third Thursday. Starts at 7:30 p.m. Central. It's about an hour long. Use chat to let us know who you are, what you do, where you're at, what your contact information is. So we can capture all that in the chat, and you can also copy that as well before the meeting ends. And then we're going to have the presentation from Sandhya, and then after that, we'll have a little bit of Q&A, and we'll go to the breakout rooms after that. Let's see what else I have here. Oh, of course, a disclaimer, right? All material covered in the presentation is for educational and entertainment purposes only. This is not an offer for solicitation to purchase securities. Everyone should consult their own financial, tax, legal, and other professional advisors. There's no guarantee that you will make money using the information and all the other fine print on here. So I will give it up then, I think, to, I'll stop sharing and give it up to James. Are you wanting to do your intro for the podcast?
Yes. So I think today we're going to have Sandhya Seshadri from Dallas, Texas, who's going to be talking about top 5 questions to ask for when as a passive investor. So it's a very inspiring, it's going to be a very inspiring session, and I'm happy to have her here. So why not, Sandhya, go ahead and do your presentation. We are doing it actually as part of the virtual meetup that we do once a month, and it's part of our multifamily investors Facebook group. So if you're interested, come and join that Facebook group and come and join us on this webinar, which we do every third Thursday every month. Go ahead, Sandhya.
Hi, my name is Sandhya Seshadri, and I'm a Dallas-based apartment investor. I invest passively, and I also am a general partner on several deals, all focused in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I'm here to talk about what are some top 5 questions you should ask before you invest in a deal as a passive investor. Also, if you're going to be raising money as a co-GP in a deal, you should be asking the same questions of the main general partner before you lose your money. Now, why is this important? So this, let's see if I can do the slides here. Okay, that's a little better. So why does it matter, right? Why is it important for you to ask these questions? Well, in a multifamily syndication, you're dealing with other people's money as a general partner or a co-GP or syndicator. Those terms are all used interchangeably. And so you have to be responsible. You are taking on a very big fiduciary responsibility when it comes to other people's money. So you need to be very careful before you do that. And as a limited partner, you worked very hard for your money. Most of these deals have a minimum investment of $50,000 or more. I know that when I got my first salary, annual salary was like $36,000 as an electrical engineer for a Fortune 500 company. That was a little while ago, but to save up $50,000 takes a while. So you really have to be careful before you choose, who you invest with, what you invest in, etc. And then think about it, right? The last time that you spent money on buying an appliance, a car, or let's just say you were going to get a contractor, right, to do some work in your house. Let's say it's a kitchen remodel and it's going to cost you $50,000. what is the first thing that you would do before you invest, before you hire this contractor? Can someone either participate by typing it in the chat box or give me a verbal answer? What is the first thing you're going to do before you hire a contractor to do a 50K job at your house?
Check for references.
That's right. You're going to check for references. So remember that if you are a co-GP, one bad deal can lead to sleepless nights, and it can ruin your reputation if you don't produce on that deal. And you will have a lot of angry passive investors asking you questions. So the number one thing to ask for is you are betting on the jockey, right? It's not just the horse, it's who's riding that horse to the game, right, to win. So the sponsorship team can make or break the deal. You really need to understand who is in charge, because a lot of times you might come across a middle person who's a co-GP just raising capital and not really involved in all of the asset management, which is basically what happens after the deal closes, right? From the date the deal closes for the next 3, 4, 5 years, who are the people in charge afterwards? They are the ones you need to go to with your questions, right? What is their track record, right? How do you verify the track record? Everyone's only going to tell you about their great deals. They're going to say, oh, my deal did so well. It outperformed. Look at this. I did 3x investors' money, blah, 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 right? Who's going to tell you the real truth of what actually happened in the deal? It's a passive investor. So you need to ask for references of a passive investor in each one of the deals that this sponsor has done in the past. Only then you'll know the true story of how the deal performed. If you just ask a sponsor for one reference, what are they going to tell you? Oh, talk to this person who invested in my apartment deal where I did 3x return in 2 years, right? Well, they're only talking about their best deal. So how do you find out about their not so great deals, right? Well, you ask for their resume. This month, if someone could just mute themselves unless they're speaking, that would be great. So if a sponsor is going to be talking to you, they're only going to talk about their great deals. So what you want to do is first ask them, oh, I have thousands of doors, is how typical sponsor tells you. Well, ask them for a list of those deals, right? Give me the names of all of those properties, where they're located, and then give me a reference of a passive investor in those deals. Who's going to tell me the real story of what actually happened? Well, guess what? They missed their June distribution. A passive investor is going to tell you that. The lead sponsor is not going to tell you that, right? So it's very important for you to figure out what is the source of your data on the sponsorship team. Is it the sponsor? That's like asking the sales guy when you're trying to buy, get a contractor over, right? They're only going to brag about what they did well. Who's going to tell you the real story of what actually happened? It's the passive investor, the customer of that general partner who actually went through a deal with them and can tell you firsthand how the deal actually performed. So don't forget, it's all about the jockey, but it's all about references, getting the right references. The second most important thing is location, right? Real estate is all about location. We know that. It's if you don't pick a good location, no matter how great the sponsorship team is, they're going to struggle. So you need to pick the places that have all the job growth, diversity of jobs. That means they're not just dependent on one industry in that location, right? Like Odessa, a military base in Odessa or something as a location versus Dallas. Of course, I've got a picture here of downtown Dallas. That's my favorite place. Is Dallas in general is my favorite market. But there are a lot of really good markets similar like that, right? Where you want to see the supply versus demand, right? There's still a low supply relative to the demand, considering the population growth that's coming in, whether it's Dallas, Phoenix, Atlanta, Houston. I think James's favorite is, of course, San Antonio, etc. So you want to find places that are landlord friendly, meaning that when you have to evict a tenant, is the judge going to be in favor of you, the landlord, because this tenant hasn't been paying rent for 3 months? Or are they going to just favor the tenant and say, well, tenant has more rights than you, the landlord, right? So you want to make sure that the sponsorship team has picked a location which checks all these boxes, which is they have less supply than demand, very high diversity of jobs, and landlord-friendly states. So remember, there's going to be a quiz at the end, so don't forget, this is the second most important thing in real estate, is your market. The third one, who is your local boots on the ground? Why does this matter, right? Do they have local knowledge of that area? In Texas, taxes can make or break a deal. So can insurance. So if you don't realize that, and you've got the sponsorship team from, sitting in Canada or California for that matter, and they're underwriting these deals without that knowledge of each location, they're not going to know these little nuances when they underwrite a deal. And therefore, they're going to underestimate their expenses. So, taxes are a very big deal in Texas, right? But it's not that big of a deal in Phoenix. So depending on who is coming in and doing a deal in that particular location, you need to have someone with that local knowledge and boots on the ground, right? And I can tell you, I think I see Jeff in the audience here. We've got a property in Cockrell Hill versus I've got a property in Carrollton. And those are both just little places within the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And it's so different the way we have to deal with tenant laws and things like that. So pick not just the team who has a local boots on the ground, but also the property management team that's going to run this deal. They need to have that local knowledge, because without that, you're going to get stuck with really very bad deal or very poorly underwritten deal. Crime is so important, because when you have crime and you attract criminals to the property, there's either a drug problem, there's violence, etc. happening, you're going to drive away the good tenants, right? So that's why, even though a particular zip code might not show up as a bad crime area, someone local can drive by the property, can look at it at night, can get a feel for, how it appears in terms of safety to, let's say, a single mom who wants to rent that unit there because it's down the street from a school. So these nuances really you find out better when you have a local eyes and ears on the ground. I can't stress this enough. If the person or the team doesn't have that local experience and background, it's very easy to make mistakes in the underwriting. And the fourth one, what kind of assumptions are they making? Because anyone can put a spreadsheet, as many of you here in the audience are, engineers, syndicators, etc. You can pretty much put anything you want into a spreadsheet and make it spit out the results you want. You want me to double your money in 2 years instead of 5 years? Hey, I could probably tweak the spreadsheet to do that, right? You want 100% return, how quickly? 3 years versus 5 years? How much of a cash on cash do you want? So it's all about the input in that spreadsheet, right? What are those numbers in that spreadsheet? How do you assume those rent bumps? What is your data? What is your justification? Are you truly getting a comparative analysis done? Or are you just looking at some online data and saying that, oh, there's a nice A-class apartment next door to my C-class property. I'm going to get a $300 rent bump because my rents are so much below the one next door to me. Well, that's not even a fair comparison, right? How could you compare a brand new property built in the last few years to an old 60s C-class property, maybe even with chillers and stuff? So how does the sponsorship team validate every number on the spreadsheet? That's the question you want to ask, is how do you know that your expenses are correct? Who validated those numbers? Whether it's your insurance, your taxes, but also the property management company, right? If you're hiring a third-party property management company, you need to make sure all of those costs are achievable, right? Can you control those expenses month to month because you are already running another property in that area? So the main question on all of this is, if you don't have the local knowledge and you're not hiring a team with local knowledge, then a lot of the assumptions that go into your spreadsheets are not valid. So what happens then? Well, garbage in is garbage out, right? Your data is only as good as, the assumptions behind every number that you put into the spreadsheet. Let me give you an example. You've got other income, right? I might say that, hey, covered parking is a premium. Everyone should be willing to pay at least $35, maybe even $50 for it. So I'm going to go build all these covered parking spaces. Well, on what basis are you saying that you could do it? Is there a property nearby who's able to achieve that? Are the tenants, if you drive around, did you do a survey? What does the existing property management company say about it when you're trying to buy that property? If you speak to if you're a general partner and you get to speak to the existing property management company, they will tell you that in a tour that, oh yeah, tenants are asking for covered parking or not. But even that is a risky assumption. That's something that you can have in your back pocket or some ace up your sleeve for later once you take over the property. But if you make huge assumptions on things like reserved and covered parking, you may not be able to implement those things. The fundamental reason that you make money in a property is the rent bump. So unless the rents are significantly below market, or in some other way you can prove a strategy of doing upgrades for which the tenants are willing to pay for it, or let's say you're going to do washers and dryers in the units, yes, you could get $35 to $50 for it, but probably not, a $300 rent bump just from an interior upgrade if your rent is already close to the market rent. So a thorough comparative analysis needs to be done. So again, as a passive investor, this might be too much in detail. So the fundamental question to ask is, how are you making your assumptions on all of these numbers? Who has verified this data for you? So my property management company, for example, is going to verify everything on the expenses that are controlled by them, like personnel costs. They should have a pulse on today. How much do you have to pay a maintenance guy? Maybe it's 26 or 27 an hour, right? Not 18 an hour like we used to pay, as an example. How much personnel do you need to run a property of this size, right? Is it a head count of 4 people or is it more like 5 or 6 people? Well, it's not just the number of doors on the property. It's also dependent on how much high maintenance the property might be in terms of just the workload. So there are a lot of different assumptions that go into it. So you want to make sure you have spoken with your property management company and they have validated these numbers as a co-GP. And as a passive investor, you ask, who's the property management company? Have they agreed to all these numbers for the controllable expenses? And how do you assume these rent bumps? Where's the data that supports it? Because this is everything, right? The assumptions that go into your spreadsheet. And okay, so who remembers the first one I said? Put it in the chat box or speak up. What's the number one thing when it comes to?
Who's the jockey?
Who's the jockey? That's right. And the second one?
Market.
Market.
The market, that's right. So the jockey, the market. What's the third one?
Local, boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground. Who's local? Are we doing remote control? That works really well for a TV, but it doesn't work when it comes to running assets, right? We want local. And the fourth one is the assumptions inside a spreadsheet. Every number has to be validated by someone else. So for example, in Dallas with taxes, we get our tax protest company to give us a message, an email where they tell us why they think this is what our tax numbers are going to be for the next 2 to 3 years. They know by county which judges and which collectors are going after it for taxes. Dallas County in particular is getting extremely aggressive. Johnson County is very reasonable, right? So you need to know these things by using a property management, by using a tax protest company that is going to give you these numbers. Same with insurance. You need an actual insurance quote. When you get an actual insurance quote, what are some questions you should be asking? Have there been any losses in this property in the last 3 years? Have there been any claims filed, right? Because that's going to change that insurance number, right? As we all know from our home and car insurances, once you make a claim, you know that number is going to go up. So you want to see if you can qualify for some kind of a group rate. But these are just, a few of the little things that go into every number in a spreadsheet. So people can make these spreadsheets look quite magical in presentations, and you might just as a passive investor go, oh, that deal, they're going to double my money in 5 years. This deal, it's only going to be a 70% return in 5 years. I think I'm going to go for the deal that looks better. Well, as you dig in, you're going to find out a few more things. For example, financing, right? They're going with bridge debt. Well, if they're going with bridge debt, until the day that they close, you don't really know what kind of proceeds they're going to get on the deal. Another underwriting I noticed has a refi plan in year 2 or year 3. So if they are planning to refi the deal, guess what? That's a speculation. What if that year 2 or year 3 is right now, right this minute, they need to be refining their deal? What is the interest rate? It's too bad, this timing isn't great, right? So refi is always a good plan to have in your back pocket, but if you're putting it in the underwriting and you can see it in there, that's aggressive underwriting, right? That's not conservative. So everybody says their underwriting is conservative. Ask them, do you have a refi already factored into your numbers? Because guess what, that boosts the numbers quite a bit. You add a refi in year 2 or year 3 and take cash out, that's a nice chunk of money. So you got to watch out for that. So every little number in the spreadsheet, tell them to share it with you and make sure it is validated by a third-party, independent, unbiased company, property management company, tax protest company, insurance, and it's an actual quote. Rent bumps are actually verified from similar comparative properties within a 1-mile radius, which look similar to the subject property, not which are just newly built in the last 5 years. These comparative properties must be within the same 1-mile radius, but also even like the same side of the highway. Sometimes that influences it. Like you might have an East Plano versus a West Plano as an example in Dallas area. And being on one side versus the other completely influences it, even if it is all within a 1-mile radius. So there's just so many little nuances to this underwriting that you want to make sure this team really knows their game. And you can figure it out pretty quickly. When you ask them questions, are they able to instantly answer it, or they need to get back to you because they don't know? Because you want to talk to the person who can answer these questions for you right away, because that's the real sponsor behind the deal doing all these underwriting. Let me see, I'm trying to page down. Okay, stress test, so important. How do they stress test? What are the different kinds of stresses that they put their underwriting model under, right? What are the worst case scenarios for which they test the deal? As an example, how low can you take down the occupancy and still make your mortgage payments? How high can the interest rate go if you're under bridge debt to where you don't have to make a capital call? You can still afford to make your payments. So what are all the different stresses under which you have tested your deal, and how do they perform under those different conditions? Can you combine a couple of stresses and see how badly the deal does, right? At what point can the deal not work? Okay, so what's a vacancy shock? That's 20%, 30%, 40%. What about economic vacancy? Economic vacancy measures not just the physical vacancy of people in the building, right? If you have 100 units and 10 units are vacant, you're at 90% in physical occupancy. But economic occupancy is, what if only of those 90 residents, only 85 of them pay their bills, right? 5 of them don't pay the rent. Then your economic occupancy is actually 85%, while your physical occupancy is at a 90%, right? So that's the question to ask is, what are all the different kinds of stress tests these guys have done, these gals have done on this deal, and what is their plan to address delinquency? I mean, we're supposedly in a recession now. Inflation is an all-time high. There's still a higher demand than supply, so everyone's increasing rents. Can these tenants actually pay it? What is your plan to address the delinquency when tenants don't pay? How familiar are you with the local area judges and courts and things like that to win a case? Can you actually evict these tenants, or are you just going to have a bunch of squatters? I mean, are we getting into an LA and New York kind of situation, right? How do you know that? What's your plan? So you must be able to answer these questions about your property, right? What are some really tough times they've had in the past in their deals? That's a question I like to ask. What's the worst thing that happened to your deal? So in my deal, and I think I have one of my investors here on this call, one of my deals, we had a problem where the property management company said all the right things on a weekly basis on the calls, but then the results, they weren't there. They would say that, oh, 5 people are going to move in by the end of this month. And I would ask for those move-in dates. Then I'd show up to the property like the day this tenant is supposed to move in. The unit would not be ready. The unit would be in a state where, oh my gosh, they haven't even painted it kind of level, right? So I know it's going to be a few more days. So what was happening was these move-in dates kept getting pushed out. And every time that happened, well, I'm losing 5 days of rent, a week of rent, 2 weeks of rent, etc. They'll say, oh, the maintenance guy couldn't come, or the make-ready guys weren't there, etc., etc. They kept making excuses. So even though on the weekly reporting, they would say, oh yeah, we're high, we're pre-leased at 95% and 96%, but the actuals were very different. So that was a huge challenge. And the way we overcame the challenge is we actually had to let them go. We had to get another company with a stronger reputation, with whom we had references from other syndicators to say that they did a good job. So you want to ask your sponsors as a passive investor, how do they model worst case scenarios, right? Just like with basic project management. You want to know your critical path, you want to model the worst case scenarios, and you want to have a workaround or a way to mitigate the risk in some way. And that's one of the most important questions to ask them. If you have already asked them the other questions, which is what? The jockey. The jockey has local experience and is really good, knows what they're doing, has a track record that you're going to verify by asking a passive investor. And if they're not willing to share it, we'll move on. There's plenty of deals out there, right? We know that. Everyone who's ever been a passive investor gets chased by probably at least 25 deals a week at this time. So if they're not willing to give references of past deals and passive investors, move on. The second one, the location. If it's not landlord friendly, if it doesn't have a greater demand than supply, it doesn't have a diversity of jobs, move on. There are certain markets that are very good for it, and so you want to stick to those markets. And the third one, anyone remember?
Boots on the local.
Boots on the ground.
Boots on the ground. Who's got the local knowledge? Who can drive by at night by this property? Who really knows what's the nuances within that area, right? Very big difference. Are they remote controlling? Is a couple of California and Canada investors remote controlling a deal in Atlanta, you know? And they might make that once a year kind of visit to the property or once a quarter. Versus, okay, I had a fire in a unit. I was able to go there the same day, right? That makes a big difference. And then the fourth one is what? It's a big one. Who remembers?
Numbers. Assumption.
Assumptions.
Every assumption has to be justified. Who's giving you all this data, right? What is the source of your data? Because as we know, garbage in is garbage out. And lastly, what are all the different stress tests that they're doing, right? To really mitigate the risk of this property. And I am open to your Q&A at this time.
So if you have a question, just feel free to unmute yourself and ask away.
I recently saw a deal advertised with 18% cash on cash and 36% IRR. To me, those numbers are very optimistic, probably unrealistic, and I'd just like to know your
find my thing
on those numbers.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that, 18% cash on cash, I don't see that. So if it's multifamily, is it a multifamily deal?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so multifamily, and in what market?
It's in coastal Mississippi.
Okay. Do they have local knowledge and local boots on the ground to be able to achieve that? And how well have their other deals done? And again, a reference from a passive investor would tell you whether or not they actually came through in those deals, in those numbers.
Yeah, they report very good results on their past deals. I actually got a phone call scheduled with them tomorrow, so I was very happy to have this meeting tonight, so I could put together some good questions for them tomorrow. But I've never been in one of their deals, but I'm going to talk to them tomorrow, and I'm going to ask a lot of the questions mentioning about references from previous deals for passive investors and all those types of things. But on the surface, those numbers, they just sound too good to be true, quite honestly. So
I would definitely try to find another apartment investor or syndicator in the Mississippi area who knows that market. So that just as a reference, double check. Like I have deals in Dallas, there's several people in this call, in this meeting who are also in Dallas. So if I shared some numbers with you on a deal, you could easily call a couple of people and just verify, is this even realistic for this location in Dallas to get this kind of a rent on a 1-bedroom, right? That's an easy, quick answer. Also, this group that James has, you could easily put some numbers out there and say, okay, if I was in this Mississippi in this zip code, what is a reasonable rent for a 1-bedroom, right? So you could yourself go into apartments.com, put that zip code, find 5 other apartments and say, okay, what kind of rents are those apartments getting? Just as a double check, because rent is your fundamental bread and butter for any apartment deal. And then of course, if they've included a cash out refi in year 2 or year 3, tell them to put you in a Zoom call with the underwriting spreadsheet in front of you, even if they can't share that entire analysis, tell them to take out that cash out refi. I bet it's got some of that in there. And take that out and see what the returns are, because that's the returns you can truly project right now. And then if that happens, that's great, right? That's really awesome if that happens and you get half your cash back in year 2 or year 3. But without it, what's the return? That's the next question I would ask. I would definitely see how the job growth and diversity of jobs is in Mississippi in that location. Because if they're only dependent on a couple of major employers, and I'm not familiar with that market to comment on it, I would definitely speak to some people. So I would definitely post in some groups that are, even outside of Texas. There's a lot of multifamily groups, and I would just ask a general question. What kind of rents do people get in this area? What kind of jobs are over there? Of course, good old Google is always helpful. But beyond that, if you come across someone, I need someone who is doing multifamily in Mississippi in this area. And just ask them 5 questions. They'd be willing to help you, and you can double check that. Because if it's San Antonio, I mean, James is a great resource. Trevor is great. So you've got, for Texas, we've got a lot of people in this audience right now to help. But we may not have that when it is another area like Mississippi.
I appreciate all that advice. That was great.
If you could stop sharing, that way we'll see everybody too, Sandhya. Thank you.
Okay.
Hello. Yeah.
I'm looking for the red button. There we go.
Here we are. Now we see you all.
Oh,
It was even better the second time.
Virtually sitting in a dark room before daylight in India versus, on stage at MFIN. It's still basically the same fundamentals, right?
Yeah.
You're in India right now?
This very second, I'm sitting in India. It's
Oh
6
my.
a.m. or 6:30 a.m. or somewhere there in the morning on a
Where-
Friday,
where?
July 22nd.
Bangalore or somewhere else?
That's how dedicated she is to share her knowledge, just so you know.
Well, I hadn't planned this trip when I had committed to Trevor to be on his meetup. So thank you for the opportunity. But, you can't go back on commitments. I mean, if it was 3 a.m., I might have tried to wiggle out of it, but 6 a.m., 6:30 is okay. A reasonable time.
So anyone have any more questions? It was very detailed. Go ahead.
Okay. So yeah, first of all, sorry, I was just shouting on the kids for turning on the volume down. I guess I was so loud, so sorry about it. My question is, when we talk to the investor, like regular friends and family people who do not have any knowledge about the whole business, how do we approach those people? Because they just trust us when they invest with us, but they do not know all these 5 points that we discussed. So how do we take on that one?
So you are a general partner trying to raise money from a passive investor?
Yeah.
Oh, well, if they don't ask the questions, don't tell them, because you'll only make them more worried and panicked.
Yeah. So
I'm trying to help the passive investor. So if it's from a passive investor standpoint, I would say do more homework, because you're making a huge investment to the tune of $50,000. If you're a general partner and you're the one controlling the deal, you're fine. But if you're not the one controlling the deal and you're raising capital with a minor role later on, and there's a general partner who's actually the main one running the property, you want to be asking all these questions, because you want to do the most thorough due diligence you can for your passive investors, because you are their voice as a co-GP.
Right. That's what I thought so, but I thought, let me just make it more clear. Well, thank you so much for answering.
Yeah, if you're a co-GP, you need to know all of these answers inside out so that you make sure the general partner is, you know, thoroughly checking every number because your name is on the line now. There's tons of people depending on you to do better than the stock market and making their money come back in time for their retirement, their kids' college, or whatever else. So you've taken on a big responsibility by taking other people's money into an investment. So you're basically like the mutual fund manager, the financial planner kind of role now, because you're saying you can do better than the stock market for them. So that's a big responsibility. So you want to make sure you check all of this. If you're the syndicator, yes, you make sure you check all these boxes. But if you're not, you're raising money for another syndicator, you want to make sure they are able to answer all this so that you can answer all this. And you can put their mind to rest when you make the presentation by saying, look at the different ways that I have stress tested my deal, and this is how it's going to be. And another thing is you can certainly say that all these assumptions are valid. So if you take all of these suggestions for a passive investor questions, you already answer them when you make your presentation, it's going to be more powerful. So you use these questions in your webinar. You have slides prepared to address every one of these things.
That's a great suggestion. Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
Hi, Sandhya. This is Subi.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for all this information. It's really great.
Sure.
Really enjoying. One question I have is, as a passive investor, how do you make sure that the property management company that the syndicators are planning to work with, they have picked the right company? Because a lot of deals that go south, we always hear that it's a property management company, we didn't do a good job or whatever it is, and later on, much later down the line, they realize that that's what the problem is and they try to fix it. But upfront, how do you try to figure out whether they are going to pick the right partners or company to partner with?
So one of the things that they typically do in their webinar itself is they talk about all their partners and the third-party companies, so the syndication lawyer, the insurance company, etc. So one of them is about the resume of the property management company. So that's a very good time to ask, do they manage properties nearby, the subject property, and are they used to this asset class of property? Because someone running a C-class property is very different style and requirements for customer service of your residents than someone running an A-class property. So you want to verify that. If this is their first time coming in to that market, and they want to give their, like, let's say they've had a really great success with this property management company in Houston, and they want to bring them into Dallas as their first deal, well, you lose out on so many opportunities because they don't have other properties they're managing in Dallas. Because we can share resources, we can share ideas, we can share vendors. They have a whole established network that you're going to miss out on by coming in as, you know, a newbie into a market. So let them be a newbie with somebody else's deal. And once they have a few deals under their belt, then I'll take it, you know, I will use them. So those are good questions to ask when they talk about their vendors.
Yeah.
And who
So one thing to note is, I know a lot of people blame property management company, but a lot of times, I mean, that's because we are in the syndicator community, right? But when you go to the property management community, they say a lot of syndicators bought it wrong and they expect them to help them save the deal. So, you know, it really depends whether the property management company is, as what Sandhya is saying, it's a lot more established in the area. They really don't need the business. Sometimes new people want to come into the market. They overcommit to some new syndicators. They say, yes, we can achieve all that. And once the deal didn't work out because they overcommitted, and at the same time, sometimes the syndicators push the property management. Can you achieve this rent? Can you achieve this much? Because market is so tight right now, right? Everybody is trying to squeeze all the juice. So they really go to all this property management company and really tell them, I need this to be done. Can you use your payroll at $1,000 per person? Otherwise, I cannot do this deal. Can you reduce this or not? So they really squeeze a lot of property management company, and a lot of property management do agree at that time, and later they can't execute, right? Because they overcommitted. So it's not only all the time property management fault. It's also the owner's fault because we are squeezing all the juice. In fact, we over squeeze them. We bought it wrongly and expect them to save the deal. And sometimes it's easy to answer to investors, right? You can always finger point, hey, it's property management fault. Of course, it's harder to tell, actually, I bought it wrongly, right? So we really have to investigate it, because I buy a lot of deals and we really can see whether it's an ownership fault or property management fault. Sometimes, property management will fail just because ownership fail, right? It looks like.
Yeah, you have to buy it on a good cost basis. That's a very important point. But then there are some companies. Hey, Masood, you want to mute yourself, man? So there's some property management companies with a very bad reputation in Dallas that you'll see consistently. There's several syndicators all letting go of the same company, and then a lot of us doing that switch. So the network also really helps. So you ask the syndicator, who else are you working with? Who else has used this PM company? Do they have a good reputation? Are they producing results for you on another property nearby anyway? So then it makes sense. So that's part of the, I guess, homework we can do as co-GPs or LPs when we talk to the syndicators. Because yes, some rent bumps are quite unrealistic. Some numbers are unachievable because everyone is demanding more in wages. As inflation is here, you've definitely got a lot more salaries to be paid from people like maintenance. They can easily find a job somewhere else. So we're having to pay a lot more to our personnel on property to keep them. To retain the good ones, you really have to pay more. So that payroll number is very crucial. So that's why I say if the property management company is running a property right there and knows what the current salaries are, and have they given you a reasonable budget.
And she said, oh, you have to attend that.
Hey, Ajit.
Ajit, I think you have to.
Ajit, you want to mute yourself, man?
I get them as soon as they get out of hand. Run a quick here. So this was awesome. I want to make sure we have enough time for breakout rooms. So just any final questions?
Sandhya, hi, this is Kiran, and thanks so much, James, Sandhya, Trevor. So another question, like you mentioned about getting references and try to get like as many edge. How hard it, from your perspective, like do you disclose like every deal, or is it few of those good ones, or how do you kind of disclose those?
Ask for their resumes. So when they have a resume, or if you even looked at their LinkedIn profile, people love to brag. I'm a general partner in thousands and gazillion doors. Well, okay, tell me about 5 of your properties. If you've got 1,000 doors, there's probably 4 or 5 properties. Give me a list, right? That's the easiest way. How do you add up to 2,000 doors and you only gave me 2 properties that are 150 doors each, right? That doesn't add up. So let me see. How many assets do you actually have under management? What's the names of those properties again? Okay, now I know. Okay, now can you give me a reference of a passive investor in every one of those deals? Okay, great. So that's where you go and find out.
And we are looking for active properties, not the past ones, or just the current active, or
all of them, right? All of them. You past performance also is helpful, but you also want current ones, right? So you want a reference. If they said, oh, I tripled investors' money in 2 years, it's nice if an investor can verify that, right? The investor might say, well, it was more like 2.2 and they're calling it 3.0. Like, well, that doesn't add up.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you also want to go network, right? Network and get to know as many people as possible, right?
I mean, network with people in this group. I mean, Trevor could probably tell you about 6 people. He's very well networked. James could probably tell you, right? So, and then you post in groups. You just post in a group and say, who's got deals that they've invested in actively or passively in this location? And as soon as you do that, you have a local contact. Let's say it's Mississippi, right? And once you find people in Mississippi, they would know, like, these are how about these syndicators? Are they any good? What have they done? And that's how you go about digging deeper. It's better to do your homework because you're going to have sleepless nights if you have one bad deal. You're going to be worrying about it, and that one bad deal could take up more time than your other 5 good deals. It's true.
Thank you so much. Thanks.
Excellent. Well, thank you. So we're going to go to breakout rooms. Hopefully I don't mess it up like last time. We're only in for 1 minute and get kicked out. I'm by far not a Zoom expert. I'm good at networking, but not great at Zoom. And but at least I didn't get locked out this week. Last month I got locked out. So I'm going to create the rooms, and then we're going to stop